Finally, I have been waiting for this hook to come out of its experimental state for literally years at this point. It's been so long that I even forgot about this hook and I thought that React had just abandoned it. But they didn't. It's here, and in React 19.2, useEffectEvent is finally stable. Now, this is a huge deal. This new hook from React actually fixes one of the biggest problems that you and I as React developers face when it comes to useEffect and its dependency arrays. And I've seen people talk about this hook, but I haven't seen people talk about it with the importance that I think it deserves. And so I want to make a full-on dedicated video to this hook because I genuinely believe that it is that important, and I genuinely believe that it's going to completely change the way that you work with useEffect in your applications. So that's what we have on the agenda today for this video. You're going to learn a lot, but before we get to that, let's take a very quick moment to just talk about the sponsor of today's video, Savala. Savala is the best of Vercel, Heroku, Railway, Fly.io, all under one platform. It essentially allows you to deploy any application, not just JavaScript, spin up storage containers to store all of your data, have managed databases, and even run and spin up your static sites. As long as your application is on GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, or even just a Docker image, you can directly host it on Savala, and you can run it under Kubernetes technology that is backed by Kinsta. They support 25 regions all around the globe, so no matter where your users are or where you want to deploy your application from, you can be sure that Savala can support it. And also, you can directly integrate Cloudflare's Edge Delivery Network to serve your static content or even your static websites. And the cool thing about Savala is that it's not just for JavaScript. You can literally spin up pretty much anything that you want, whether it's JavaScript, Go, Python, any framework like Remix, Gatsby, or Astro, or even things like Bun and Express and Koa, you can do it all on Savala. And one of the best things about Savala is their pricing and the fact that they have no artificial limits. You literally only pay for what you use, and they have very simple, predictable, and transparent pricing, which essentially means that you're never going to get any surprise bill or any hidden fees. To try everything that Savala has to offer, you can click the first link in the description, and if you do that, you're also going to get access to a $50 in free credit that you can deploy to any application that you want. Thank you once again to Savala for sponsoring this video. Alright, let's begin. Now here we're looking at the official React 19.2 release article that came out just a couple of days ago, which by the way, if you're on Import React, which is my free newsletter all about React, you would have seen this already. Link in the description if you want to join. And here we can see all of the new things that React 19.2 actually released. One of those things is the one that we're interested in, which is the useEffectEvent hook. Now there's a bunch of other cool things in this article. I'll leave a link to it in the description. If you haven't read this, I highly recommend it because it's really cool, specifically this activity component here. But again, we're only interested for this video in this useEffectEvent, which I have opened up here, the actual documentation of this hook. Now, this hook, useEffectEvent, is specifically built by the React team to work with useEffect. I mean, it's here in the name, right? You have useEffect in the name of this hook. Essentially, what this hook allows you to do is it allows you to create something that you can call an effect event. So basically an event, it's a function that does not have to go in a dependency array of the useEffect, but can still see the latest values of other things in the component, like state or props, for example. And this is huge because it finally fixes the long-standing problem that we had in our applications of the dependency array of useEffect. Because the truth is, sometimes we want to use something inside of the body of an effect, but we don't want to provide it inside of the dependency array to rerun the effect whenever it changes. Previously, we couldn't really do that. We didn't have a standard way of doing that. We had the latest ref pattern, which I covered in a previous video, but now with useEffectEvent, this is a direct response from the React team to address that specific problem. So let's directly jump into some code because that's going to be the best way for us to first understand the problem that we're facing and then understand how useEffectEvent actually solves the problem. And finally, I'm going to show you some things that you have to watch out for and some things that you really want to make sure that you understand before working with the useEffectEvent hook. So here I have a simple application, and here we have a page component that receives a URL through props, right? So we don't really care about where this URL is coming from. We just care that we have some specific URL that is passed from another component, and this page component here depends on that. Then we have a state variable here for the number of items. Now, this is meant to kind of simulate if you had a cart and you could add items to the cart. This is basically there to track how many items in that cart we currently have on this specific page. And then we have a useEffect over here, which is calling the trackEvent function, which is a simple analytics function that just simulates actually tracking this to an analytics provider. We're simply taking it here an event, which is only going to be a page view, and then whatever secondary data that we want to attach to that event. And then we're just going to log that event here. But again, you would imagine that in a real application, we would send this to some service to track this event. And so here in the useEffect, we're calling trackEvent. We're tracking this page view event, which makes sense because we're on the page component. And then we're passing here the actual URL that we want to track and also the number of items, because we also want to track at the moment that we visit that URL, how many items do we specifically have in a cart at that time. And because we're using both URL and number of items inside of the body of the useEffect, of course, the rules of hooks in React when it comes to useEffect dictate that we have to provide both of these properties in the dependency array of the useEffect. So we have here URL and then we have here number of items. Now, here's the problem that we currently have. Let's think about what are we actually trying to track here, right? We're tracking a page view event. The page view, what does it actually depend on? Not in the context of the useEffect, right? Because in the context of the useEffect, it's both of these values, but in the context of the event and in the context of the information that we as humans, as the ones building the product, what are we actually trying to track with this page view event? Is it the URL? Is it the number of items, or is it both? Well, in this case, what we actually really care about is this URL over here. Because if you look at this page component here, it receives a URL. And so whenever this URL differs, we ideally would want to track a new page view representing a new URL. And then at that time that we track that new URL, we have this secondary piece of information here, the number of items that we also want to track. So we say, okay, we just want to see the products page or a specific product page. We also want to track how many items in that cart we had at the time of visiting that page. And that's important. Now, the way that we currently have our code set up, this is actually not what's happening. We're not only tracking this URL over here, but we're also tracking the number of items, which means that when we come here, we have this button here to essentially add an item, to simulate adding an item to the cart. This is going to call set number of items. It's going to increment the value of number of items. And what's happening here with our current setup is that even if the URL hasn't changed, but the number of items has changed by this button here, we're going to recall this useEffect and we're going to retrack a new page view event. And this new page view event is going to have the same URL that we had before, because we haven't actually changed the page that we're currently on. And this is not what we want. This is not what we want as we, the ones who are building the product. We don't want to track multiple events for the same page URL, even if the number of items changes. We really only care about this URL over here to track distinct page events. And this number of items here is just secondary information that we just sent along with that main event that we're concerned about. And so ideally, we would prefer not to have this number of items inside of the dependency array of the useEffect, so that we don't re-trigger this useEffect when it changes and only trigger it when the URL changes. And this, by the way, is a very real and valid use case. Sometimes you want to use something inside of the body of your effect, but you don't want to provide it inside of the dependency array because you don't want the effect to actually trigger every time that it changes. Now, how do you solve this? Because before this new useEffectEvent hook, there was no real way for us to actually solve this in a legal way, in a way that wasn't actually violating any of the rules of hooks. The only way to solve this, and I put this in quotations, is to come here and to just remove this number of items from the dependency array, and then just have this useEffect here run only whenever the URL changes. Now, what happens when you remove something in a dependency array that is used inside of the effect, if you have ESLint enabled, which honestly you should, you're of course going to get here an error. You're going to get that React hook useEffect has a missing dependency, number of items. Either include it or remove the dependency array. ESLint is basically telling you, hey, you made a mistake here. You're using a value inside of a useEffect, but you're not providing it in a dependency array, and that is going to lead to bugs in your applications. You should fix it. And here's the thing, ESLint is right. This is not the solution that you want to do. This is not the way that you solve this problem. And unfortunately, many developers just do this, and many developers are convinced that there's actually nothing wrong and nothing bad could happen if you do this in your application. if you're one of those developers, stick around because I'm going to show you a little bit later a real concrete example of how this can actually produce a very big bug in your applications. Now, of course, some developers might come here and just do this and then disable ESLint right for that line and just disable this rule. But again, this is just masking the problem. It's silencing the problem. It's not making the problem go away. It's just putting it under the rug, and that rug is eventually going to fall apart and the problem is going to come back and haunt you. I guarantee it. So this is not the solution, right? The solution is not to remove number of items from the dependency array. So how do we solve it? Well, that's where the new useEffectEvent hook actually comes into play, and it provides us a very legal way without violating any ESLint rules and without violating any React hook rules to actually solve this problem really efficiently. So let's look at it. So first, we're going to come here and import useEffectEvent from React. Now again, this is only available if you're on the latest React 19.2 version. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come here and we're going to create an effect event, which is going to be a function, a callback function using that hook. So we're going to do const on visit. That's what we're going to call our event. This is going to be equal to useEffectEvent, which is our hook. We're going to call it. And then this takes one argument, which is the actual function, the callback that you want to call. In this case, we're just going to provide an empty function for now, because I want to talk a little bit about how you actually structure this function, because that's important that you get it right. So essentially, in the body of this function, what we want to do is we want to call this track event here, and we want to pass the required properties, page view, URL, and then number of items. Now, the cool thing about useEffectEvent is that it can actually see all of the values inside of the component here. It can see number of items, it can see the URL, and it can always see the latest value of those values. This is kind of similar to a ref, where the ref is actually not reactive and can always see the latest value of things. This useEffectEvent is very similar. So what we can actually do is we can come in here and we can do track event. We can call this function and honestly just copy these functions here, right? Just put it here, and we can directly call track event with the URL and the number of items. And these ones, at any point in time when we call on visit, when we call this useEffectEvent, they're always going to have the latest value of the URL and the latest value of number of items. That's how this hook works. And so what we can do is we can just come here and then remove this track event here and just call directly on visit. And then we can just remove our dependency arrays over here. Now you're going to see I'm still having an issue here with ESLint. It's saying that I need to provide on visit. This is wrong. This is only happening because this hook is so new and I haven't yet updated ESLint for that. So just ignore that. And actually, to make it easier, I'm just going to go here to ESLint and I'm just going to disable this here so that it doesn't confuse you. You should not have to provide the actual useEffectEvent in the dependency array of useEffect. That's the whole point. And so now with this, we've legally removed at this point everything in our dependency array, and we're calling this on visit, which is always going to get the latest value of the URL and number of items without us having to provide the actual event in the dependency array. This is the modern way and the standard way, the official React way of solving the problem of having something in a function that you want to call, but not provide in the dependency array of your useEffect. Now, let me tell you something that maybe you haven't caught. There's actually a bug here. This is actually not going to work exactly as we want. Even though we created this effect event here exactly as we should, even though we passed it here and we haven't provided anything in the dependency array, there is a bug and this is actually not going to behave the way that we want. I'll give you a couple of moments if you want to pause the video to just try to think about this, but this is what I was talking about when I said that I was going to show you an example of a real bug if you don't handle your dependency arrays correctly. This is it. So how is this useEffect going to run here, right? So we have a useEffect, it has an empty dependency array. So we're going to get on some specific page with some URL, right? Maybe it's specifically the product of some URL. And then here, this useEffect is going to run and we're going to call on visit with that specific URL. Great, we're going to track that URL, and because this useEffect event always sees the latest values, we're going to see the URL and we're going to see the number of items, whatever it was at the time, and that's going to get sent directly to this track event function. Great. But now what happens if URL changes, right? We're now on a new page and we're using the same component, and so the component actually re-renders. What happens? Well, in our useEffect here, we provided an empty dependency array, and so this onVisit is actually not going to get called again. Even if it can see that the URL has changed, it's not reactive. It's not going to rerun by itself. To get it to rerun, you have to pass the thing that it listens to in the dependency array of the useEffect. And because we haven't done that, this useEffect is not going to run, which means that we're going to have a new page view event in our application that we're not tracking. That is a huge bug because usually you use these events here to actually determine the success of your product and make decisions about it. And if you have incorrect data, you're going to make incorrect, uninformed decisions, and that's a huge problem. And that's what I mean when I say that you should always make sure to get the dependency array correctly. Because if you forget something, or if you disable ESLint, which is there to make sure you don't forget, you're going to forget something, you're not going to trigger something when you expect it to be triggered, and then good luck, have fun trying to figure out where the problem actually is in your application and why your events are not firing correctly. Or even if you notice that your events aren't firing correctly, because again, it's going to take some time before you actually notice that something is wrong. And this comes back to the question that we posed at the beginning when we looked at this code. What are we actually trying to track here? What's the thing that we really care about? In this case, it is this URL. We care about the URL. The URL signifies a distinct new event. If there's a new URL, we want a new event. That's not the case for a number of items. Number of items is a secondary piece of data that we track that we don't care to actually retrack our event for. We only care for that for this specific URL. And so in that case, and this is what you really need to be careful when working with useEffectEvent, in that case, you have to take the thing that you actually care about and you have to, instead of just providing it here in the body of the function, you have to instead provide it as an argument to that specific function. The reason you do that is because now you're telling this effect event that it's going to be a distinct new event for every single new URL. Which also means that now you're going to have to pass it here inside of the onVisit function, which also means that you're going to have to pass it inside of the dependency array, because this one you're using inside of the body of the effect. It's not inside of the effect event. There is a difference. And so this one has to go in the dependency array of your useEffect. And again, we've just seen that this is exactly what we want. We want to track new events based on the specific URL. And so when we do that, we pass those as arguments to the effect event, which makes us have to pass it in the actual dependency array of the useEffect. Everything else that we don't want to pass in a dependency array, like our number of items, does not have to go as an argument here, but can just directly go inside of the body of the actual event. And here I just have an error. This is a type error. Let's make this a string just to get TypeScript to no longer complain. There we go. Now it's fine. So now this makes sense. And now this correctly and completely solves our problem, because every single time that this URL changes, this onVisit is going to get called again with a new URL marking a new distinct event. And then every single time that we're going to call track event here, because we said that the effect event always sees the latest value of things, we're always going to get the latest value of this number of items, even if we haven't provided it in the dependency array. That's the power of this useEffectEvent hook, and that's how you use it specifically with useEffect. And so with this, you can now do pretty much anything. Anytime that you have something in the useEffect that you want to run, but not necessarily put in a dependency array, you do this. And then everything that the effect actually depends on, any reactive thing that marks a distinct new event, you put in the arguments here, you call it here, you provide it in the dependency array, and everything else you don't, and you're still getting the behavior that you expect and that you want without violating any rules of hooks. And now to really reinforce this, let me show you another typical example that you're probably going to have in your applications and how you can also use useEffectEvent to solve that in the same way. Let's say that this page component here also took an onClick function. That was a function here. And then we just had it here as an argument, the onClick. And let's say that we had here another useEffect that we want to call onClick over here. Now, because we're using onClick inside of the body of the effect, we of course have to pass it in the dependency array, but we know in React that functions are not stable references. And so on every single render of this page component, we're going to get a new onClick function, which is going to call the onClick over and over again, which is probably not what we want. Now, again, maybe this doesn't make sense because I called it onClick here, but like just use your imagination here. This could be any function that we receive through props, and then we want to call it inside of the body of an effect. Ideally, maybe we only want to call this once on mount, right? So we just want to remove this here, but again, doing it directly this way is going to lead to bugs. ESLint is going to complain, and actually the React compiler is not going to compile this component because you're violating the rules of hooks. And so instead of doing that, you just put it here and you come here and you create const and then on click event, you create a useEffectEvent. This time it has no arguments because the function doesn't take any arguments. You call the onClick function and then here you call the event instead and you remove it from the dependency array. And there you go. You've solved your problem again in a simple way without any arguments. This is how that looks like. So now with this, you're equipped. You no longer have to worry about dependency arrays in useEffect. I hope that this problem can finally be sorted once and for all. This is the legal, official, standard way of doing things moving forward until React decides to change something. But at least for now, this problem is finally solved and we can finally put this issue with useEffect and dependency arrays to rest. That's it. That's all that I have for this video. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to leave it a big thumbs up. You can also click here to subscribe. You can click here to watch a different video of mine. My name has been Darius Kozin. This is Kozin Solutions. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.